In the northernmost reaches of North America lies a territory where winter is not a passing circumstance, but a dominant condition that defines every aspect of existence. Here, the cold doesn't arrive abruptly, but when it settles in, it does so with absolute determination. Temperatures drop gradually until they reach levels that would annihilate any unprepared organism in minutes. The air becomes dry and sharp, and each breath exposes the body's fragility in the face of an environment that offers no respite. The landscape is slowly transforming. Basso first, the intermediate tones disappear. Then the contrast hardens. The snow begins to cover the ground, not like a uniform blanket, but like a scattered warning that accumulates in shadows, depressions, and corners where the sun can no longer reach. As the days pass, this fragmented presence consolidates into a continuous layer that completely redefines the landscape. In Canada, winter is not just a season, it's a structural force that reshapes the balance of life. What functioned as a relatively stable system during the warmer months is subjected to constant pressure that alters behaviors, relationships, and priorities. Food becomes scarce, transportation becomes more expensive. Mistakes that could be corrected in summer now have immediate consequences. For the fauna of these regions, surviving winter is not simply about enduring the cold. It involves anticipating, adapting, and accepting a profound transformation in one's way of life. Each species responds differently, but all face the same fundamental challenge: conserving energy while still obtaining it, staying active without becoming exhausted, and moving without exposing oneself more than necessary. As autumn recedes, the first signs of conflict emerge. Territory, once shared without serious consequences, becomes a critical resource. Areas that once offered abundant food can now only sustain a few. Movements decrease, encounters become more frequent and more tense. Competition ceases to be implicit and begins to manifest itself in increasingly direct behavior. Predators face an immediate challenge. Many of their traditional prey reduce their activity, migrate, seek refuge, or enter states of torpor. Tracking them becomes more complex. Deep snow erases landmarks but also exposes tracks. The terrain punishes speed and favors strategy. Hunting ceases to be a matter of explosive pursuit and becomes an exercise in patience, observation, and calculation. Even the smallest animals feel the impact of this change. Tiny birds, opportunistic insectivores, year-round active rodents, all must compete for a food supply that dwindles day by day. Buried seeds, frozen plant debris, insects hidden under bark or in the soil, nothing is available without effort. The social dynamics within many species are drastically altered. Individuals that maintained clear distances during the summer now tolerate greater proximity, not out of conscious cooperation, but out of thermal or informational necessity. In other cases, the opposite occurs. Scarcity reduces tolerance and reinforces hierarchies. Access to food defines positions, and disputes are resolved quickly, leaving no room for prolonged conflicts. In this context, the Arctic fox emerges as one of the most refined examples of adaptation to extreme winter. Light-bodied and with precise movements, this small predator has transformed its body and behavior to fit almost surgically into the icy environment. Its fur, which during the summer displayed shades of brown and grey, completes its transformation to pure white, making it an almost invisible extension of the snowy landscape. That transformation is not just aesthetic. The fox's winter coat is a highly specialized structure. A dense undercoat of fine fur traps warm air close to the skin, while longer, tougher guard hairs block wind and moisture. Even the pads of its paws are covered in fur, which distributes its weight across the snow and allows it to move without sinking into surfaces that would slow down other predators. The fox's preparation for winter begins long before the first snow covers the ground. During the brief Arctic summer, it feeds intensively, accumulating fat reserves that can represent up to a fifth of its body weight. This fat not only serves as fuel, but also as thermal insulation, an internal barrier against temperatures that plummet below 40 degrees below zero. Its anatomy also adjusts. The ears are reduced in size and rounded, minimizing heat loss. The snout shortens. Every centimeter of exposed surface is optimized to conserve energy. Nothing in its body is accidental. Everything responds to a constant environmental pressure that has shaped the species for thousands of generations. Emerging from its den in the early hours of dawn, the fox pauses. It doesn't move immediately. It sniffs the air, listens, assesses. Its hearing is sensitive enough to detect the movement of a small rodent under tens of centimeters of packed snow. This ability allows it to hunt even when the surface appears completely still. The burrows it uses are not simply temporary shelters. Many of them are inherited structures, complex networks of tunnels and chambers that have been expanded and reused for centuries. These underground cities offer protection from the wind, thermal insulation, and a strategic base from which the fox organizes its winter activity. As winter progresses, its behavior becomes increasingly opportunistic. It follows large predators at a distance, waiting for scraps. It raids food stores whenever it can. It has even learned to hunt seals at ice vents, a strategy that demands hours of absolute stillness and precise timing. When hunting small rodents, its technique is as effective as it is spectacular. It remains still, tilts its head, and locates the sound. Then it leaps vertically and dives headfirst into the snow, disappearing completely. It often emerges with its prey caught in its jaws. Each movement is the result of a delicate balance between energy expenditure and probability of success. The fox's territory becomes critical during the winter. It can encompass tens of square kilometers and must be carefully defended. Wolves, lynxes, and large birds of prey pose constant threats. The fox not only hunts, it must also avoid becoming prey. Every movement involves a constant risk assessment. During the coldest periods, it reduces its activity to a minimum. It may remain inside its burrow for days on end, curled up with its tail wrapped around its body like an extra blanket. Its metabolism slows down, conserving energy until a real opportunity justifies the expenditure. Not all species face winter from the surface. Beneath the ice of shallow ponds and lagoons, the northern leopard frog adopts a radically different strategy. Seemingly motionless, wedged between rocks and sediment, this cold-blooded creature enters a state that defies traditional definitions of active life. Its preparation begins when the water starts to cool. Unlike mammals, the frog cannot generate its own body heat. Instead, it produces special compounds that act as a natural antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming in its vital tissues. These biochemical changes allow it to withstand near-freezing temperatures for months. Choosing the right shelter is critical. It needs a body of water deep enough to avoid freezing completely, but not so deep that it lacks dissolved oxygen. A difference of just a few centimeters can mean the difference between survival and death. Once settled, the frog reduces its metabolism to almost imperceptible levels. Its heart beats only a few times per hour. Its lungs stop functioning. The necessary oxygen is absorbed directly through the skin. Digestion ceases. Brain activity is minimized. For months, it remains in a state of absolute dormancy. Winter passes without movement, without any visible reaction. The frog doesn't respond to stimuli that, under other circumstances, would trigger an immediate escape. Its entire system is geared towards conserving energy until the environment allows for activity again. Beneath snow and ice, life does not come to a halt. It reorganizes. Every species, from the most agile predator to the most motionless amphibian, finds a different way to fit into a world where the margin for error is minimal. The Canadian winter does not select for strength or size, it selects for fit, and that pressure is only beginning to reveal the full extent of its reach. Beneath the seemingly motionless surface of the Canadian winter, balance continues to shift steadily. Each passing day not only reduces food reserves, but also erodes the body's capacity for recovery. Cold does not act as a sudden blow, but as a sustained pressure that forces all organisms to redefine their limits. In this setting, survival is not about overpowering the environment, but about fitting into it without breaking. In the prairies and open forests of central Canada, the Richardson's ground squirrel adopts a strategy opposite to that of the fox or the lynx. Rather than remaining active and adapting to extreme cold, this small creature disappears from the visible world for months. Beneath the frozen ground, its body enters one of the deepest hibernation states known among mammals. Preparation begins long before winter becomes fully apparent. In late summer, the squirrel drastically increases its food intake. Each day is devoted to eating, storing, and converting energy into fat reserves. Within a few weeks, its body weight can increase by nearly half, a transformation that completely alters its physiology. This fat is not a simple energy store. It is the fuel that will sustain vital functions during a prolonged period of near total inactivity. The underground shelter where it will spend the winter is the result of years of accumulated work. The main chamber lies several meters below the surface, beneath the soil's freezing line. There, the temperature remains relatively stable even when surface conditions reach extreme cold. The tunnel system serves not only as access, but also as a mechanism for ventilation and defense, a network designed to reduce risk at a time when the squirrel cannot react quickly. When the time comes to enter hibernation, the squirrel's body undergoes a radical transformation. Its body temperature drops to just a few degrees above freezing. The heart, which under normal activity beats hundreds of times per minute, slows to an almost symbolic rate. Breathing becomes so slow that the intervals between inhalations can extend for several minutes. Metabolism is reduced to a minimal fraction of its usual function. Digestion stops. Brain activity is simplified. The body enters a state of absolute conservation, in which every chemical reaction is carefully regulated to avoid unnecessary expenditure. For weeks, the squirrel remains motionless, sustained solely by the reserves accumulated during the summer. However, hibernation is not a continuous and uninterrupted state. Periodically, the body reactivates for brief intervals. These awakenings are energetically costly, but they serve essential functions. They allow body temperature to be readjusted, waste to be eliminated, and the integrity of certain physiological systems to be maintained. Each of these episodes consumes a significant portion of the fat reserves, so their frequency must be kept within very precise limits. Survival during this period depends as much on the quality of the shelter as on the amount of stored energy. A poorly located burrow, inadequate ventilation, or insufficient fat reserves can doom the squirrel even before winter comes to an end. In this context, there is no margin for late mistakes. Everything is decided before the cold fully takes hold. Meanwhile, in the boreal forest, a figure of imposing size moves among firs and spruces with a calm that contrasts with the harshness of the environment. The moose, the largest of the deer family, confronts winter from a different position. Its size, far from being a disadvantage, becomes a strategic ally. The relationship between body surface area and volume allows it to retain heat more efficiently than smaller animals. The moose's preparation begins with gradual physiological changes. As daylight diminishes, its metabolism slows. Its energy requirements are significantly reduced, allowing it to survive on a lower quality diet. The development of its winter coat is one of its primary defenses against the cold. The outer hairs, long and hollow, trap air and create an exceptional insulating barrier. Beneath them, a dense layer of fine hair provides additional protection. Its long legs and broad hooves allow it to move through deep snow with surprising efficiency. Where other animals sink and become exhausted, the moose advances with a steady gait, creating trails that it later reuses to reduce energy expenditure. Every movement is calculated to minimize unnecessary effort. The moose's winter diet is austere and demanding. It abandons the variety of summer to focus on twigs, shoots, and bark. Willow, birch, trembling aspen, and balsam fir become its primary sustenance. To obtain sufficient nutrients, it must consume dozens of kilograms of woody plant material each day. Its digestive system, with multiple specialized chambers, slowly ferments this matter, extracting energy from components that would be useless to most animals. This digestive process generates internal heat, an additional advantage during the coldest periods. The moose not only feeds to stay alive, it also uses digestion as a secondary source of body heat. The balance between feeding, rest, and movement becomes critical. Too much activity implies an expenditure that cannot be compensated. Too little reduces intake below the minimum required. During winter, moose may loosely group in areas where the terrain offers shelter from the wind and relatively stable access to food. These groupings do not involve active cooperation, but they generate indirect benefits. Compacted trails facilitate movement and reduce individual effort. Even so, competition for the best browsing sites can provoke brief but intense confrontations. The threat of predation never disappears entirely. Although an adult moose is a formidable adversary, wolf packs can exploit deep snow and accumulated fatigue to attack weakened individuals. The moose's survival depends on maintaining its physical condition and avoiding areas where the terrain limits its mobility. At another level of the ecosystem, in caves, abandoned mines, and deep cavities of eastern Canada, little brown bats prepare for an even more extreme survival strategy. Their diminutive size makes them especially vulnerable to the cold, but it also allows them to adopt one of the deepest hibernation states among warm-blooded mammals. During late summer and early autumn, bats enter a period of intense feeding. Each night they consume quantities of insects that can exceed half of their own body weight. This phase, known as hyperphagia, allows them to accumulate sufficient fat reserves to sustain months of inactivity. The choice of winter refuge is critical. They seek places where the temperature remains stable, just above freezing, and where humidity is high to prevent dehydration. Deep caves, abandoned mines, and similar structures offer ideal conditions. Many bats return year after year to the same site, following specific migratory routes that can extend hundreds of kilometers. Once settled, they cluster in dense colonies. Hundreds or thousands of individuals crowd onto walls and ceilings, sharing heat and humidity. This proximity reduces energy loss and offers some protection against occasional predators. When hibernation begins, the bat's body enters a state of suspended animation. Heart rate drops dramatically. Breathing slows to the point of near disappearance. Body temperature approaches that of the surrounding environment. Metabolism is reduced to minimal levels. In this state, the bat can survive for months without eating or drinking, sustained solely by the reserves it has accumulated. However, as with the ground squirrel, hibernation is not entirely continuous. Periodically, bats must awaken to perform essential functions. These episodes, though brief, consume large amounts of energy. Each awakening represents a gamble, necessary for long-term survival, yet dangerous if it occurs too frequently. At this point, the Canadian winter is revealed not as a uniform enemy, but as an implacable filter that favors very different strategies. Constant activity, absolute immobility, massive size, suspended metabolism. There is no single way to endure. There is only precise adaptation to the position each species occupies within this extreme system. And as the cold continues to consolidate its dominance, the interactions among these strategies begin to intertwine, setting the stage for an even more complex phase of winter that is still far from having revealed its full reach. Winter advances into a deeper, more stable phase. There is no longer surprise or visible transition. The cold persists, the snow consolidates, and the environment enters a state of permanence that demands something different from mere initial resistance. At this point, the challenge ceases to be withstanding the impact of change and becomes maintaining oneself under constant pressure, with no clear signs of relief. For many organisms, this is the most dangerous stage, not because the environment worsens, but because accumulated wear begins to exact a silent cost. In the boreal forest, an almost invisible presence moves fluidly across the hardened snow. The Canada lynx represents one of the most precise adaptations to deep winter. Unlike other predators that suffer when the terrain is covered by thick snow, the lynx thrives under these conditions. Its anatomy appears specifically designed for this setting. Its enormous paws, covered with dense fur, distribute its weight so efficiently that it can move across surfaces where other animals sink and slow. This advantage becomes decisive when snow depths exceed the movement capacity of many prey species. The snowshoe hare, its primary food source, also has broad feet, but even it begins to show limitations when the snow compacts unevenly. The lynx exploits every irregularity of the terrain, every hardened edge, every pre-existing trail, moving with minimal energy expenditure. The lynx's coat becomes markedly denser during winter. The inner layer thickens into an exceptional thermal barrier, while the outer hairs repel moisture and wind. Thanks to this insulation, the lynx can remain motionless for long periods without losing body heat, a crucial ability for a hunting strategy based on absolute patience. Winter hunting for the lynx does not rely on long pursuits. The terrain does not allow it. Instead, the cat observes, listens, and waits. Its hearing is extremely sensitive, capable of detecting subtle movements beneath compacted snow. Its vision is adapted to low light, giving it an advantage during the long twilight periods that dominate the Canadian winter. The lynx's territory expands or contracts according to prey availability. In years of abundance, it can remain within relatively small areas. When hare populations decline, it is forced to travel much greater distances, adjusting its routes to minimize effort. It uses natural trails, frozen stream beds, and paths opened by other animals, optimizing every movement. The lynx's solitary nature becomes more pronounced during winter. Encounters with other individuals are rare and, when they occur, are usually resolved through olfactory and visual signals without the need for direct confrontation. The energy cost of a fight would be unacceptable in this context. Survival depends on conserving every available reserve. Meanwhile, in the depths of forests and wetland areas, a completely different strategy sustains life during the harshest months. The beaver lodge rises as a solid structure in the midst of frozen ponds, a fortress built with precision over weeks and months. This structure is not merely a shelter, it is a closed system that allows an entire family to pass through the winter without exposing itself to the surface. The beaver's preparation begins long before ice seals the pond. During autumn, the family works tirelessly, felling trees, dragging branches, and storing vast quantities of wood underwater. This submerged cache constitutes their sole food source for months, when fresh vegetation disappears entirely. The location of the food cache is critical. It must be in water deep enough not to freeze to the bottom, yet close enough to the lodge to allow rapid and safe access. Faulty planning can prove fatal if ice prevents access to the reserves or if they become unreachable due to changes in water level. The lodge itself is designed to conserve heat efficiently. Its walls, formed from interwoven layers of wood, mud, and stones, reach considerable thickness. When the exterior freezes, these layers harden further, creating an insulating barrier that keeps the interior temperature relatively stable. Inside, the main chamber is positioned above the water level, accessible only through underwater tunnels. During winter, the beaver's world contracts to this enclosed space and the aquatic corridors connecting the lodge to the food cache. The ice covering the pond acts as additional protection, blocking access by terrestrial predators. However, it also prevents any escape to the surface. The family remains completely isolated for weeks or even months. Beaver physiology is perfectly adapted to this aquatic winter life. Its lungs allow it to remain submerged for extended periods. Its fur, composed of a dense, waterproof inner layer and water-repellent outer hairs, retains heat even in water near freezing. Constant grooming is essential to maintain these insulating properties. Inside the lodge, life proceeds at a slow and restrained pace. Beavers huddle to share warmth, reduce activity to the minimum necessary, and enter the water only when it is essential to retrieve food. The winter diet, based almost exclusively on bark and soft wood, is poor in nutrients, requiring frequent consumption to meet energy demands. Prolonged cohabitation in a confined space also imposes behavioral adjustments. The family unit must maintain stable coexistence for months without the possibility of dispersal. Hierarchies are well defined and conflicts are resolved quickly and discreetly, as any unnecessary energy expenditure jeopardizes collective survival. At the opposite end of the spectrum of size and strength, small birds such as the black-capped chickadee face winter with a combination of memory, social behavior, and metabolic flexibility. Despite their diminutive size, these birds remain active throughout the winter, enduring temperatures that force many much larger animals to hibernate or migrate. During autumn, chickadees store thousands of seeds and insects in caches scattered throughout their territory. Each bird maintains its own reserve system, distributed so that no single loss becomes catastrophic. Their ability to remember the precise location of these caches for weeks or months is a key adaptation, supported by seasonal changes in their brains. The chickadee's winter plumage becomes noticeably denser. By fluffing its feathers, it creates an insulating layer of air that reduces heat loss. On the coldest nights, it can enter a state of controlled torpor, lowering its body temperature and metabolism to conserve energy. This state makes it vulnerable, but it is indispensable for surviving extremely long and cold nights. Chickadees form mixed species flocks during winter, associating with other small birds. These groups increase vigilance against predators and improve efficiency in finding food. However, within the flock there is a clear hierarchy that determines access to the best resources and the safest nocturnal shelters. Foraging in winter is a race against time. A chickadee must consume a significant proportion of its own body weight each day, simply to maintain its body temperature. Each day involves methodically moving along branches, bark, and conifer needles, inspecting every surface in search of hidden food. Persistence is as important as efficiency. As these strategies unfold in parallel, winter continues to exert its constant pressure. There are no spectacular events or abrupt changes. Selection occurs silently and cumulatively. Individuals that fail to balance expenditure and recovery begin to disappear, not always in visible ways, but definitively. The Canadian winter ecosystem is sustained by this delicate web of extreme adaptations. Each species occupies a precise position within a system that tolerates neither waste nor improvisation. Winter does not reward brute strength or excessive speed. It rewards precision, economy, and the ability to operate within strict limits. And while snow continues to blanket the land and daylight remains scarce, the cycle moves steadily toward its most demanding point, where even the best adapted will face a final test before the balance shifts once again. Winter reaches its point of greatest stability. It no longer advances or retreats in any obvious way. It holds. This apparent stillness is deceptive because it is during this period that accumulated pressure begins to determine who can persist and who cannot. Snow remains compacted, cold constant, light scarce. There are no new signals that trigger immediate alarm, and precisely for that reason the wear becomes more dangerous. Survival ceases to be a reaction to the environment and becomes a test of internal endurance. In this setting, the grey wolf emerges as one of the species that not only withstands winter but uses it to its advantage. Unlike many solitary predators, the wolf does not face the cold alone. Its greatest strength lies not solely in its physiology, but in its social structure. The pack functions as a coordinated unit capable of transforming scarcity into opportunity through precise cooperation. During the months preceding winter, wolves do not prepare by accumulating excessive fat. Their survival depends on maintaining optimal physical condition to hunt throughout the cold season. Autumn is a period of adjustment, not passive accumulation. The pack refines its routes, reinforces social cohesion, and assesses prey availability within its territory. The wolf's winter coat develops as a highly efficient double layer. The outer hairs repel moisture and block wind, while the inner layer traps warm air against the skin. This insulation is so effective that wolves can rest directly on snow without losing body heat even when temperatures drop to extreme levels. Resting behavior also adjusts. During the coldest nights, wolves curl together, forming compact bodies and protecting muzzle and extremities with their tails. This posture reduces exposed surface area and creates a warm microclimate that conserves energy during long periods of inactivity. The pack's winter hunting is a demonstration of collective efficiency. In deep snow, wolves take turns breaking trail. The individuals leading the movement expend more energy, but that effort is distributed among all members. Cooperation reduces individual cost and allows the pack to cover great distances without exhausting any single wolf. When pursuing large prey such as moose or deer, wolves use the terrain as an ally. They drive ungulates into areas where snow is deeper or more irregular, forcing them to expend energy disproportionately. The goal is not a rapid chase, but a progressive wearing down that shifts the balance in favor of the pack. Hierarchical structure becomes even more significant during winter. Dominant individuals gain first access to food, ensuring that the most experienced hunters retain the strength required for future hunts. This distribution, which may appear unfair from an external perspective, is a strategy that maximizes the survival of the entire group. The winter territory of a pack can encompass hundreds of square kilometers. Maintaining it requires constant patrols and significant energy expenditure. Boundaries are marked regularly, not only to deter other packs, but also to maintain internal cohesion. Territory defines routes, refuges, and hunting opportunities. Losing it would mean exposure to unfamiliar areas at the worst possible time of year. Carrion gains increasing value during this stage. Wolves do not waste opportunities. Animals that have died from cold, starvation, or previous injuries represent a crucial source of energy that reduces the need for active hunting. The ability to locate and defend these resources against other scavengers is a decisive advantage. While wolves range across vast expanses, other inhabitants of the ecosystem confront winter from near-total immobility. Deep within burrows, caves, and natural shelters, grizzly bears undergo one of the most complex physiological states in the animal kingdom. Their entry into winter torpor is the result of intense preparation that begins months earlier. During late summer and autumn, the bear enters a period of extreme hyperphagia. It consumes massive quantities of food, converting every available calorie into fat reserves. This process is not chaotic. The bear's body is designed to maximize storage efficiency, accumulating enough energy to survive for months without eating, drinking, or eliminating waste. The selection of a den is a critical decision. The bear evaluates ground stability, protection from wind, snow accumulation, and isolation from disturbance. Many dens are excavated on slopes oriented so that snow fully covers them, creating an additional insulating layer. Once settled, the bear enters a state of deep torpor. Unlike true hibernators, its body temperature drops only moderately. However, heart rate and respiration are drastically reduced. Metabolism slows to a fraction of its normal activity, allowing energy conservation over extended periods. One of the most remarkable aspects of this state is the bear's ability to recycle substances that would be toxic in other animals. Urea is converted into reusable proteins, preventing the loss of muscle mass. Water is conserved through metabolic processes that eliminate the need to drink or urinate for months. In pregnant females, the challenge is even greater. The birth of cubs occurs during winter torpor. The cubs, tiny and helpless, depend entirely on the mother, who produces nutrient-rich milk while remaining in a state of minimal activity. This capacity represents one of the most complex and efficient adaptations in mammalian biology. While bears dream beneath layers of snow, winter continues its silent selection at the surface. Not all species have access to such secure refuges. Many must face each day as a constant negotiation between risk and necessity. Scarcity reduces tolerance for error. A minor injury, a poorly calculated decision, or excessive energy expenditure can mark the beginning of an irreversible decline. The winter landscape, blanketed in white, appears motionless from a distance. Yet every track, every compacted trail, every gnawed branch tells a recent story of survival. Snow records activity with relentless clarity, revealing patterns that others can interpret. What repeats becomes predictable, and what is predictable becomes vulnerable. At this point in winter, night extends as an additional trial. Temperatures reach their most persistent lows. The body must decide whether to move in search of food or remain motionless to conserve heat. There is no universal answer. Each species, each individual, confronts that decision at the limit of its own physiology. Psychological pressure, though not conscious, also plays a role. The lack of variation, the constant repetition of minimal routines, and prolonged uncertainty affect behavior. Some individuals become excessively conservative. Others, driven by necessity, take increasing risks. Both extremes can prove fatal. Winter does not eliminate life immediately. It wears it down, it reduces it, it filters it. Each day survived is the result of hundreds of accumulated correct micro-decisions. There are no grand feats or heroic moments. Survival is defined in silences, in immobility, in invisible choices. And while the cold remains firm and snow continues to shape the terrain, the ecosystem moves toward a critical point. The worst is not always the beginning or the end. Often it is the persistence. Winter has not yet finished exacting its cost. Winter begins to show ambiguous signs. There is no clear change or sustained relief, but certain details disrupt the rhythm that for weeks seemed immovable. Daylight extends a few more minutes beyond the horizon. The sun remains low and weak, but its presence alters the snow's surface for brief intervals. That minimal change is enough to modify behaviors that had been rigid for months under necessity. Snow no longer behaves the same way throughout the day. In the early hours, it remains hard and stable, allowing relatively efficient movement. As the sun advances, some areas give way, soften, and become uneven. At night, the cold hardens everything again, creating treacherous layers that combine firmness and fragility. The terrain becomes unpredictable. A secure step at dawn can turn into a dangerous error by dusk. Bodies that have reached this point are marked by wear. There are no surplus reserves or accumulated energy. Every adjustment requires precise calculation. Experience gained during deep winter becomes a vital tool. Those who interpret these changes as definitive improvement often pay a high price. Winter does not forgive excessive anticipation. Prey species begin to modify their routines cautiously. They do not immediately expand their territories, but they explore. A few meters farther, a trail that had been abandoned, a clearing that begins to show areas of compacted ground. These incursions do not seek abundance, they seek information. Knowing what has changed is as important as finding food. That additional movement involves risk. The body responds with less margin than before. Reflexes are slower, strength diminished. Yet necessity pushes forward. Remaining immobile when the environment begins to offer opportunities can also prove fatal. The balance becomes even more delicate. Predators observe these changes with renewed attention. The transition is a period of general vulnerability. Many prey animals reach this point at the limit of their reserves. A minor injury, a delayed reaction, a minimal separation from the group can become decisive signals. Hunting becomes more opportunistic, but not more impulsive. The cost of failure remains too high. In open areas, wind continues to shape the surface. It scours snow from some sectors, leaving hard, exposed plates. These natural corridors facilitate movement, but they also concentrate activity. Where movement is easier, risk increases. Visibility improves, and with it, the probability of unexpected encounters. Within the forest, change is slower. Shade prolongs the dominance of cold. Snow remains deeper, more stable, less affected by daily variation. For some, these spaces remain reliable refuges. For others, they become zones of prolonged wear, where the lack of variation limits opportunities. Hunger no longer manifests solely as absence, but as accumulated fatigue. The body responds with increasing clumsiness. Even when a clear opportunity appears, taking advantage of it requires evaluating whether the effort justifies the risk. Not all opportunities warrant the energy expenditure they demand. Natural selection at this stage does not favor the boldest, but the most precise. Some individuals, driven by necessity, begin to assume greater risks. They cross boundaries they had avoided for weeks. They explore exposed areas. They do so not out of confidence, but from exhaustion of alternatives. These decisions mark a clear distinction between those who can still wait and those who no longer have that option. The landscape begins to fragment visually. Where everything was once continuous white, contrasts now appear. Darker surfaces, irregular textures, defined shadows. This complexity returns information, but it also confuses. The environment ceases to be uniform and demands a finer, more constant reading. Nights remain cold, but they lose uniformity. Some offer a slight reprieve, others descend with the same harshness as in deep winter. This irregularity complicates adaptation. The body can no longer reliably anticipate the effort required for the following day. Energy management becomes even more critical. In certain parts of the landscape, snow recedes enough to expose small patches of ground. These are neither extensive nor consistent spaces, but they represent real opportunities. There, food is more accessible. These areas become focal points of activity, attracting both prey and predators. The concentration increases tension. Every encounter becomes more consequential. Watercourses enter a dangerous phase. Ice, which for weeks provided reliable routes, begins to lose uniformity. Cracks appear, thinner zones emerge, deep sounds travel across the surface. Established paths cease to be trustworthy. Memory is no longer sufficient. Each crossing must be reassessed, as if for the first time. This change alters entire territories. Areas once connected become isolated. Others, which remained separate for months, begin to link in new ways. The mental map built during winter loses validity. Relearning becomes essential, and not all bodies are capable of it. Accumulated wear remains the decisive factor. Many individuals that manage to pass through the coldest period do not survive this stage, not because conditions worsen, but because the body can no longer respond to an additional adaptation. Minor injuries worsen, fatigue becomes chronic. The system fails when it is asked to readjust once more. Others, by contrast, begin to show a slow but perceptible recovery. Movements gain fluidity, posture becomes more stable, attention remains high, but the body responds with greater efficiency. It is not renewed strength, it is recovered functionality. That subtle difference is decisive. Beneath the surface, the hidden world shows clear signs of reactivation. The space between soil and snow becomes more dynamic, tunnels widen, movement increases. This activity drives the system from below, generating a chain effect that reaches those who depend on it. The base of the ecosystem responds before the visible surface. With this increase in activity come new opportunities, but also new risks. Sounds beneath the snow multiply, vibrations confuse. Correctly interpreting what is happening below becomes more complex. The environment demands renewed attention. Light, though still weak, alters internal rhythms. Periods of activity lengthen. Rest becomes fragmented. The body, which had learned to conserve energy through long spans of immobility, must find a new balance. This readjustment is not immediate. During this process, vulnerability increases. Some individuals make mistakes through excessive anticipation. They confuse change with safety. They move more than is advisable, expend energy too early, and expose themselves at inappropriate moments. Winter punishes these errors even in retreat. It does not forgive impatience. Others remain restrained. They observe more than they act. They adjust gradually, consolidating each advance before attempting the next. For them, the transition becomes a genuine opportunity, not a trap. The landscape no longer appears static. Snow shifts, ice responds, air changes. Everything moves, albeit slowly. Complexity returns. With it comes the need for finer, more frequent, more risky decisions. Winter has left a deep imprint. Even as it retreats, its effects persist. Learned behaviors do not disappear immediately. Caution, economy of movement, and constant attention continue to dominate. Experience becomes guidance. This phase is not a conclusion, it is a threshold. Life that reaches this point enters new terrain, shaped by months of pressure. There are no guarantees of success, only the possibility of adapting once more. And as cold loses its hold in irregular fashion, the world prepares unknowingly for the next turn of the cycle. The trial of winter has not yet ended. It has only changed form. The end of winter does not arrive with a clear gesture or an obvious break. There is no specific day on which cold abandons the territory, nor a precise moment when pressure disappears. What happens is subtler and, for that very reason, more demanding. Winter begins to withdraw without announcement, leaving behind an environment that no longer responds to the rules that governed it for months. But which still does not yet offer the conditions for true recovery. Daylight lengthens perceptibly. It does not warm, but it persists. Each day gains a few minutes that alter the internal rhythms of those that have survived this far. The body recognizes this change before the mind does. Periods of activity expand, pauses are redistributed, and absolute immobility ceases to be the dominant strategy. However, accumulated wear prevents any abrupt response. There is no surge of movement or immediate return to previous patterns. Everything occurs in a restrained manner. The landscape begins to show clear signs of transformation. Snow loses its uniform dominance and fragments. Mixed surfaces appear, where hardened layers, soft zones, and stretches where the ground begins to emerge irregularly coexist. This variability turns every movement into a constant reading of the terrain. The environment ceases to be predictable. Where risk was once uniform, it now becomes selective, localized, and changing. For many organisms, this phase is more dangerous than the heart of winter. For months, the world was harsh but stable. Now, instability demands an additional adaptation when reserves are at their lowest. The body no longer has room for prolonged errors. Every adjustment counts. Prey begin to expand their movements with greater resolve, though without abandoning learned caution. They do not abruptly return to wide territories. They explore gradually. A new clearing, a forgotten trail, an edge where snow has retreated enough to allow access to compacted food or plant remains. Each advance is assessed, each retreat as well. Food remains limited, but the difference now is that effort begins to yield visible results. That minimal improvement alters the entire dynamic. The balance is no longer sustained solely by endurance. The possibility of recovery begins to open, even if slow and irregular. Predators adjust their behavior once again. Extreme urgency gives way to a strategy oriented toward rebuilding condition. Hunting ceases to be exclusively a response to immediate hunger and becomes a medium-term investment. Staying alive is no longer the sole objective. Preparing for the next phase begins to matter. The landscape fragments into zones with different rhythms. In open areas, partial thaw creates more accessible movement corridors, but also more exposed ones. Visibility increases. The probability of encounters rises. Within the forest, shade preserves cold for longer. There, winter resists surrender, prolonging pressure on those that depend on these refugees. Watercourses pass through a critical phase. Ice loses coherence. What for weeks was a reliable surface now becomes a silent threat. Cracks appear, weakened areas emerge, deep sounds travel through the structure. Familiar crossings cease to be viable. Water regains prominence first as danger and later as resource. This change forces internal maps to be redrawn. Safe routes are abandoned, others are discovered. Memory built during deep winter loses precision. Relearning becomes essential, and not all bodies are capable of it. Accumulated wear remains the decisive factor. Many individuals do not live to benefit from this transition. They survive the most intense cold, but not the readjustment. The exhausted body fails when additional flexibility is demanded of it. It is a harsh paradox of the natural cycle. Endurance does not guarantee subsequent prosperity. Others, by contrast, begin to show clear signs of recovery. Movements become more fluid, posture stabilizes, reaction time improves. It is not renewed strength or abundance. It is functionality, and in this environment, functionality is an immense advantage. Beneath the surface, the hidden world that sustained the ecosystem during the harshest months now drives change. Subterranean activity increases. Tunnels widen, exchanges intensify. That invisible foundation reactivates the system from below, generating effects that take time to manifest at the surface, but are already underway. With this momentum come new interactions. Concentration around areas where snow retreats first increases competition. Encounters become more frequent and more complex. The simplicity imposed by winter gives way to a scenario with more variables, more options, and more risks. Nights remain cold, but they are no longer identical. Some allow deeper rest. Others return with unexpected severity. This irregularity prevents definitive adaptation. The body must remain flexible, alert, prepared to retreat if necessary. The transition punishes both rigidity and impatience. Behaviors learned over months do not disappear. Caution persists even as conditions improve. Economy of movement remains the norm. The memory of extreme cold acts as an internal brake, preventing unnecessary expenditure. Experience becomes a silent advantage. The landscape slowly loses its white dominance. Muted tones appear, followed by more defined contrasts. There is no immediate explosion of life. Renewal is gradual, restrained, almost timid. Nature does not rush, it adjusts. Organisms that move now do so with a mixture of necessity and expectation. The future is no longer solely about endurance, but it offers no guarantees of abundance. Each decision still carries weight. Each choice can tip the balance in one direction or the other. Winter leaves visible and invisible scars, fallen trees, broken branches, altered trails, thinner bodies, refined behaviors. Nothing returns exactly to its previous state. Each cycle rewrites the territory and those who inhabit it. Young individuals that manage to survive now carry an early experience that will shape them for life. They learned under pressure with no margin for prolonged error. That bodily memory will influence how they face future winters. Adaptation is transmitted not only through genetics, but also through learning. Many did not make it this far. Their absence is part of the achieved balance. Winter does not act with intent or judgment, it simply filters, reduces, redefines. The system that emerges afterward is not gentler, only different. The world that reassembles presents new opportunities, but also new challenges. Competition intensifies, hierarchies readjust, territory regains importance. Life does not stabilize, it merely changes the form of pressure. The memory of winter remains as a constant warning. Even as conditions improve, learned prudence guides decisions. Excessive confidence becomes a real risk. Experience weighs more than strength. There is no definitive end. The cycle does not close. It continues. Winter retreats, but it will return. Not in the same way, not with the same effects, but with the same function, to remind that survival is not a permanent state, but a continuous process of adjustment. Nature offers no rewards for having endured. There are no guarantees of future prosperity, only the possibility of continuing to adapt. That is the only constant. And so, without ceremony or clear conclusions, the world moves on, transformed, refined, marked by what it has endured. Life persists not by defying the environment, but by learning to exist within its limits. Winter fulfilled its role, not as an enemy, but as a regulating force. What remains is a new balance, fragile, always provisional. The cycle continues.